Hi, hello, and greetings, everyone. It's really lovely to have you all here with us tonight. I'm Susan Zeiger. I'm a program director at Primary Source, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Stephanie DePoe. I want to thank Stephanie for all of the work that she's done to make this evening possible. I am so pleased to welcome you to our Primary Source online seminar series for spring 2019, Latin America and the Caribbean Today, Topics for the Classroom. And tonight, for the first session of our three-part series, we'll be probing from diverse angles and perspectives the broad topic of environmental issues and environmental change and activism in Latin America. And we'll be looking at some of the ways that people of the region have responded to climate change and environmental exploitation through the arts, through activism, through research and policy, and other modalities. I have to say this could not be a more pressing topic, and I know you all agree. It's only a year and a half ago that Hurricane Maria brought profound devastation to Puerto Rico and other islands in the Caribbean. And I would say that that event, in a sense, is when Caribbean climate change came crashing into broad public awareness for many people. But in fact, as we'll see tonight, people in the Caribbean and Latin America have been grappling with environmental change and environmental colonialism, environmental exploitation for a very long time and in many different ways. So we have two marvelous presenters this evening. Professor Elizabeth Paravisini, a scholar of Latin American studies, Hispanic studies, and environmental studies from Vasser College, who is doing truly unique, cutting-edge, and fascinating interdisciplinary work. And I'll be introducing her more fully in a moment. We are also so fortunate to be joined by Denise Cremin, who's a teacher of Spanish language at Newton North High School here in Newton, Mass. And Denise has been an innovator and a leader in bringing global studies to her Spanish language classroom. And she's inspired many others at her school and in her district and well beyond to do the same. She's also a veteran of many primary source courses. And when I asked her if she would join us tonight and share some of her creative strategies for teaching environmental issues through a Latin American lens, she said the nicest thing to me, which was, of course I'll do it. It's only payback for all that I've taken from your programs at Primary Source. So thank you, Denise, for being so generous with your time and ideas and so gracious to join us tonight. So welcome to both of you and welcome to all of you who've joined us as participants and listeners this evening. I think you're in for a big treat. The webinar this evening, I want to just quickly point out to you, is part of a three-part series, and we're very excited about it and hope you'll join us for all three. They have been a little challenging to schedule, and I apologize about changes as programs have bounced around, but hopefully they will all turn out to be well worth the wait. This is our kickoff event for the series tonight, and then coming up, Thursday, March 28th, that is a new date, but it is the final date, I promise. We'll send reminders about that. But the second in our series is Migrants, Drug Lords, and State Responses, How to Make a Border Crisis. And the speaker for that evening is Professor Jorge Capetillo from UMass Boston. And we also have a wonderful veteran teacher, another creative teacher leader, Matt Jones, who will be sharing some of his lesson plan ideas and advice for approaching what is a sensitive and sometimes contentious topic in the classroom. And then the last of our series is Democracy, Governance, and Civil Society. Where are we today? We'll close out the series on Monday, April 8th with that session with Professor Amy Risley of Rhodes College. Certainly, there will be keeping a close eye there on the unfolding situation in Venezuela and again share resources and ideas for unpacking that topic in your classroom. So let me also say that later in the hour tonight, we will have a designated block of time for your questions and comments. But we do encourage you to begin entering your thoughts whenever they occur to you and your questions. That will help us to sort through them and prioritize or just get them ready to go when we get to Q&A time. So again, if you were just signing in now, there's a button or a line in the panel on the right that says chat, and there's an arrow, and if you poke the arrow, you'll get, and it'll expand into a chat box where you can type your question, and all of the moderators will see the question that you type, though other participants will not see it. So we'll share those as we go along. And finally, I will just say for housekeeping, as we typically try to do this session, will be recorded and posted on our resource pages at Primary Source and on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to refer back to it later on and also share it with other colleagues and friends who may be interested. Just a word about our organization for those who are less familiar. We are a non-for-profit that partners with educators to bring global learning into K-12 classrooms and schools. This is our anniversary year. We are 30 years old this year, a big milestone for nonprofits. The heart of our work is professional development that's carried out in many different formats, face-to-face, online, book discussion groups, and webinars like this one. We're a resource center for global education with many online learning tools and many resource tools that you can access on our website. We do curriculum development and school consulting as well, and we welcome you to join us and learn more about our work. I'll close out this evening by sharing some ways that you can do that. So now, with no further ado, I'd like to turn our attention to the topic of this evening and introduce our first fabulous speaker. Lisa Paravisini is a professor at Vasser College, appointed in Hispanic Studies and Environmental Studies, which is, I think, not a highly typical combination of interests and expertise. She is a true Renaissance woman. Her scholarship is wide and diverse, as she's written probing and nuanced analysis of Caribbean literature with a comparative perspective, and that itself is a unique and important dimension of her work, to be doing that cross-cultural analysis of literature in the region. She's written cultural criticism on contemporary art, and as well she's done research and advocacy on environmental issues and the environment of the Caribbean, understanding it both in historical and contemporary terms, and has in particular focused on vanishing species in the area. So that breadth of her work is remarkable. She's a beloved teacher at Vassar, and her courses there include endangered islands, climate change, rising sea levels, and environmental refugees. And she's the co-creator of a fascinating blog, which I hope we'll get to talk with her about a little bit later. Tonight, she'll be sharing her work probing the Caribbean sugar plantation, past and present, and its environmental impacts and consequences. So we're very excited to learn from you, Lisa. And I think at this point, we are ready for you to begin. So we'll be giving you the screen control now, and you can turn on your mic. We'll turn your mic on for you. And want to say hello, and I'll tell you if we can hear you.
Yes, hi, how are you?
That's perfect. You sound great. Thank you so much. We welcome you to start, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Susan, for that very generous introduction. Thank you so much. I wanted to start by saying that the idea for this study of the art on the plantation in the Caribbean came from a tiny news item that I saw once that talked about the emergence of bagasse. Bagasse is that fibrous mass that is left after the sugarcane is crushed as an important source of biofuel. And it seemed to me when I saw this to anyone who had experienced the realities of plantation life, like the ultimate cosmic irony, right? Is nearly assessed value. One producer of bagasse pellets argues that what was once a symbol of waste now could be farming gold, right? And promised to increase sugar producers' profits. I thought, this was ironic because he was, while pushing into deeper oblivion the plight of the workers worldwide who continue to produce sugarcane in deplorable conditions and ruined environments. So that's where this study started, with the irony of how valuable bagasse, the debris, the trash of the plantation had become. So its newly acquired status as a renewable and carbon neutral source of energy, I thought also obscured the damage that cane production continues to inflict on the land and the workers that produced it. Deforestation, soil erosion, the use of poisonous chemical fertilizers and pesticides that impact land and water continue to degrade the environment of those fated to live and work amid its waste. So it obscured, I thought, the role of sugarcane cultivation as the most salient form of power and environmental violence through which empires manifested their hegemony over colonized territories throughout the Caribbean. So I set out to look to see. I started looking for bagasse and found this treasure trove of artistic work that I want to present to you for a moment. And Susan, I don't have access to, oh, there it is. Never mind, I got it. Got my PowerPoint. So I wanted to share with you a bit of the legacy of the environmental violence of the sugar plantation through a conversation about a group of contemporary Caribbean artists whose focus on the ruin and debris of the plantation often uses bagasse as either artistic material or symbol of colonial ruination. I thought that embedded in these representations of the ruins and garbage of the sugar plantation were a number of colonial relationships to the environment that engaged themes that are familiar to those who study plantation, the plantation economy, land tenure, diaspora, slavery, indentured servitude, family networks, destroyed family networks, community and modernity, among others. So it was very eloquent, I thought, this focused on bagasse. So I found that in their multifaceted representations through photographs, paintings, and installations, these artists were insisting on the eloquent capacity of the engagement with ruins and debris to address the continuing impact of colonial and imperial power on the landscapes and peoples of the Caribbean region. This visual engagement, moreover, as you can see, there. The social engagement, moreover, sought to denounce the ruination brought to the Caribbean islands by the plantation, and to display for viewers perhaps unfamiliar with the history of the plantation, the despoiled environments that local populations continue to inhabit. So I have to say that my interest in the ecological impact of the plantation stems from a deep personal connection to the history of sugarcane production in my home island. I'm Puerto Rican. For decades, my father worked for the Aguirre sugarcane mill, the last operational sugar refinery in Puerto Rico, which closed its doors in 1993. As a result, my childhood and adolescence were dominated by the rhythm of the cane planting and harvesting seasons, and by the absorbing narratives of the day-to-day struggles of the cane workers, some of them my relatives, that represented the largest segment of the population in our small town and whose children were my classmates. So the history of my maternal family, intricately bound as it has been with the relentless efforts to escape and then stay away from the cane fields, it was one thing that motivated me to go deeper in my research. So the landscapes of my hometown, I come from a small town called Salinas in southern Puerto Rico, were dominated by cane. Its cyclical evolution from green stalk crowned with flowery spumes to pungent bagasse served as backdrop to our yearly routines. As children, we anxiously waited the burning of the fields before harvest and pretended to ice skate on the pavement, made slippery by the falling ashes, while our mothers rushed to get the clothes off the line before they were covered in soot. We played among the rows of canes, careful to avoid the razor-sharp leaves of the stalks, and begged for rice on the narrow-gauge trains that took the canes to the mill. The mill that you see here in ruins in the photograph before you. We were also keenly familiar with the troubles of what they call tiempo muerto, the dead time, with the unemployment and penuries of the fallow season when there was no employment and therefore no income. So when the sugarcane industry began its slow decline in the 1960s, we followed closely the fate of the land and the local economy as cane ceased to be what we saw everywhere we turned. The collapse of the sugar industry developed across several decades and impacted the landscape and our townspeople in myriad ways. Fallow fields were reclaimed by bush, new crops were tried in order to provide a new economic base. It was pineapples, it was tomatoes, it was different things. Ostrich farms came and went, short-lived oil refineries polluted the air, the soil and the water, leaving rusted carcasses and unexplained maladies in their wake. There was a plan to build a lab monkey breeding facility, which split the community, and then the monkeys started escaping, so we have now an invasive species. Housing developments named after former plantations sprung on former cane land. Solar panels replaced failed pineapple farms. It was just a constant change in our lives. All this while the ruins of the sugar central, as we call it, the mill, roasted away as a much photographed romantic ghost. So the deforested hills nonetheless remain denuded. Without the trees, the rains have not returned. And this has been the reality of the town. What is not irrigated remains parched and arid. At school, we read our writers' attempts to come to terms with our problematic history as cultivators of sugar, responding viscerally against 19th century exalted celebrations of landscapes dominated by the swaying flower of the sugar cane plant, the guajana, that we found in poems like the one you had before you, celebration of the flower of the sugar cane, which is actually very beautiful, but symbolically is a very troubling image. Rooted in the culture of sugar cultivation, our readings in school of its representation in literature and art were guided by our own understanding of its economic, social, and environmental realities. So when I started looking at this group of artists creating their work around this, I was struck by the richness of their expression. I saw it immediately as something related very closely to what we call both the environmental humanities and environmental art. So a central aspect of my query became this question of what is environmental art, right? And this is my favorite definition. The one you have before you is art that informs and interprets nature and its processes, educates us about environmental problems, that is concerned or incorporates environmental forces and materials, art that helps us re-envision our relationship to nature, proposes new ways for us to coexist with our environment, while it reclaims and remediates damaged environments, restoring ecosystems in artistic and often aesthetic ways. We understood that such art would be ephemeral, would come and go very quickly, but also very tellingly that it would be produced in cooperation with others, that it would engage communities in the creation of art, and that was very exciting. That's what I started finding when I looked at the work that was being produced. So the representation of, just to give you a little bit of the history, the representation of the Caribbean plantation in art is rooted in the sort of landscape with sugar plantation tradition that dominated the development of Caribbean artistic expression from the 17th to the 19th century through amateur and traveling professional painters like Franz Post, whom you see, oh, I'm sorry, you don't see here, you saw it before, Franz Post, but here you see Agustino Brunias, Michel Jean Casabon, Victor Patricio Landaluz. I'll give you some examples for you to see. And in a minute, we're going to see some work by Eduardo Laplante. They produce sort of reassuring images that capture the landscape, architecture, and economic potential of the plantation, but nonetheless without addressing the harshness of its labor conditions or the system's immersion in a global pattern of exchange that was dependent on slavery and the slave trade. So these were consumable images of picturesque otherness, usually produced to adorn the houses in England or Spain or France of owners of plantations. That fulfill an important social function. This is what John Michael Black has argued. An important social function. They made a positive visual argument on behalf of plantation society, and constituted a sort of pleasant propaganda that covered plantation life with a sweet veneer of tranquility. It's a description that he offers that I find very quite interesting and apt. New approaches to the depiction of the plantation through art began emerging following emancipation in the British colonies in the mid-1830s among Creole painters sympathetic to the abolitionist movement, influenced by new social theories ranging from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's on the social contract to Karl Marx's Capital, which was published in 1867. This new work challenged previous images of the plantation and slavery as benign institutions, right? So one of the painters, since I cannot give you many examples, I'll give you one. This is a Puerto Rican painter called Francisco Manuel Oyer y Cestero, a very close friend of Camille Pissarro. Camille Pissarro, as you may know, was from St. Thomas. We think of him as the French Impressionist, but they were close friends and spent time in France together. But Oyer returned to Puerto Rico. Oyer's series of paintings of Puerto Rican plantations sort of remain as a challenge to the power of an established Creole plantocracy. He wanted to problematize the familiar bucolic presentations, seeking instead to depict them as sites of interaction between races, between white Creole elite and slaves of African descent. So his plantation images represent an attempted synthesis of the overlapping narratives of land control and reform and race that engulfed Puerto Rico during his lifetime. He died in 1917. His plantation images show fields covered in debris during the cane harvest, from the debris left on the field as oxen carts moved the cane to the mill, to growing piles of bagasse outside the mill buildings after processing. Workers mill about this debris, signaling an identification between labor and plantation ways that disrupts the viewer's expectations from earlier plantation paintings, right? This is a world of labor, of debris, of a little bit of a mess. So Oyer was not alone in his critique of the plantation through art. As we move into the 20th century, we begin to see very richly nuanced representations of plantation labor, as you see here by Cuban painter Wilfredo Lam in his famous work The Jungle, where he sought to capture what he called, in quotes, the drama of my country and disturb the dreams of the exploiters through the creation of phantasmagoric African warriors adrift in a forest of cane. Says sugar production in Cuba, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, etc., moved from medium-sized family-owned concerns to huge corporate-owned centrales, as they call them, U.S.-owned factories in the fields after the Spanish-American War. Oyer's careful deconstruction of the plantation order was echoed in the works of photographers like Jack Delano. Who arrived in Puerto Rico in the early 1940s as part of the New Deal's Farm Security Administration to chronicle the lives of cane workers through countless photographs, hundreds and hundreds of photographs. Delano's work challenged the confident image of prosperity and bounty that emerged out of official depictions of the industrialized sugar production featuring newspapers, government reports, and tourist postcards. It refocused attention away from these images of the industrial plantation as modernity, as modern landscapes, and towards the plight of workers in the fields and the dignified poverty of their homes and families. If you can later Google some, his images are just fabulous in their humanizing of the worker. So his portraits of Puerto Rican cane workers underscore their individuality and inscribe them into the history of labor exploitation and institutionalized poverty that was the legacy of the bucolic, quote-unquote, plantation of earlier representations. In many of his portraits of cane workers in the field, I particularly love this one that you have before you. He used cane and bagasse as background, immersing his subjects in the fields of cane production and its debris. This aesthetic and ideological approach to the depiction of the plantation was echoed, for example, in works by other Caribbean artists of the time, like you see here in Cuba's Mario Carreño and Jamaica's Alberto Hugh. Just sort of similar depictions of labor in the cane fields at a crucial moment in the history of labor organization in the area. But they are in all these paintings, the cane workers are embedded literally and metaphorically in the canes and bagasse. So Delano's photographs, like the work of Carreño and Hui in Cuba and Jamaica, were crucial documents in the development of a nationalist critique of the industrialized plantation throughout the region. Now, when we look at contemporary artists who have been working since the 90s, for example, we see a very complex engagement with the vexed history of the visual representation of the plantation in the region, because they established dialogues with earlier iconic images. For example, here you see one of a photographic series by Atelier Morales. This is a Cuban architect, Juan Luis Morales, and his wife and artistic partner, Teresa Ayuso. And they had this series called Adrift Patrimony, Sugar Refineries. Is from 2004, and they sought to capture with a kind of bitterly beautiful technique of digital photography and gouache the ruined remnants of the once thriving sugar industry in Cuba. So the series uses as a point of departure the work of French painter and lithographer Eduardo Laplante. You see that in the bottom of the slide, whose 38 lithographs of Cuba's principal sugar plantations illustrated a very famous book published in 1857. And these colorful landscapes of smokestacks towering higher than palm trees and this romanticized view of the plantation served as the inspiration for Atelier Morales' reimagining of the Cuban plantation landscape. So they went back to the mills depicted in the 1857 book, and then photographed the ruins that were left here. And this was a project envisioned in 2002 after Cuba closed its sugar mills. And they wanted to capture through the photographs the sugar mills of Laplante's iconic lithographs as they are today. The old machinery rusted, the wood buildings crumpled, the sites abandoned, some half submerged in water, others covered by bush. They also wanted to point to the misuse of the land. the photographs of the ruined mills with their brooding, poignant depiction of the collapsed buildings and rusted machinery can be linked also to the recent interest in ruins photography, with their aestheticization of the abandonment and decline of architectural and natural spaces that were once central to Cuba's national iconography. So here you see a closer view of one of them. Their ghost-like appearance recalls figures associated with sugar production and slavery, like zombies or revenants from a forgotten past. They also emerge from the bush or disrupt the landscape as unfathomable, sort of unnatural debris. Their dialogue with the 19th century images that precede them, however, allows Atelier Morales to transcend the simply kind of modeling and to transmute Laplante's romanticized view of life in the plantation, which already negated a history of forced labor and land abuse, into a sort of contemporary tale of loss and kind of ode to poetic memory. A critic called Anne Stoller, who's very interested in ruins, has written about the trauma behind the treatment afforded to what she calls sites of decomposition that fall outside historical interest and preservation, which seemed to me very apt, so sentiment echoed in Atelier Morales' project to bring to the spaces photographed the honor due to them as ruins of empire power and sites of forced labor. But if you can see, I cannot show you a lot of the photographs, but you can see in the ones here how a sense of patrimonial and historical loss. The corroded machinery emerging from the luscious vegetation, its reddish, rusting, glaring contrast to the vivid greens. So it forces us to confront the poignancy of the decaying infrastructure of an abandoned and superseded industry in which countless numbers of Cubans and other Caribbean people invested their lives. This image, for example, can also be read as an illustration of another kind of decline and obsolescence, that of nature trying to regain its ascendance over the formerly abused plantation terrain and the infrastructure through which this mistreatment was achieved. So I find the series really quite fascinated for the way it engages both past and present, and speaks to a whole history that has dominated the whole area. Their concerns are echoed by artists. This is an artist from Martinique called Hervé Beuz, who has built an impressive body of work focused on a sustained critique of Martinique's history of sugar production, which he addresses through installations that use fermenting and pungently smelling bagasse. The thing about bagasse is that because it is soaked in alcohol or fermenting sugars that become alcoholized, stings to high heaven. His most important project of the last decade, which he has presented in a number of iterations, is titled, like here, Machinique. It's kind of a combination of the words machine, iniquitous, and Martinique. So the project's design is a very simple one. Sculptures in the shape of the island of Martinique are generally filled with bagasse, cane leaves, or trash, and then set in place. In some cases, in the floor of a former sugar mill, here suspended, and others suspended in the air or floating on a pond, deriving their particular meaning from the installation's context. His goal is that of establishing a sort of archaeology of the territory of Martinique sugar cultivation through what he has called his matrice carte, or master maps, or matrix womb maps. That illustrates the places in Martinique where sugar plantations were set. In his first iteration, which you can see here, this was the simplest. This was installed in Martinique's sugarcane museum, and the shape of the island floating was filled with cane leaves. and it mirrored, you'll see some yellow signs. Those mark the places in Martinique where the original plantations founded in 1671 were placed. So it's engaging with that history, trying to highlight how the ancient divisions of the land continue to hold sway over island land tenures today. He has described this very eloquently. I love the way he puts it as, and I quote, an attempt to perceive the marrow of our being in the world. And he talks about the depth of the colonial exploitation as having reached the marrow, squeezed the slaves like Cain, getting to the very source of the blood of the nation, crushing it to the bone. So he's deeply engaged in the symbolism of this work in a way that engages history very seriously. So here you have another iteration of the project. This one, a shape of the island on the floor, and hovering right over it, pieces of the machinery that was used to crush the cane. So if I wanted to return for a moment to this installation. You see it here because this one is filled with bagasse. And this was an installation that was presented in, oops, I'm sorry. What did I do? This was an installation that was put in Habitation Clément. Habitation Clément is a former plantation that produces some of Martinique's best agricultural rums. This one I thought had multiple resonances with the venue because it's suspended as a sort of gigantic spider spider in the middle of its web, a kind of reference to the Anansi trickster tradition of Caribbean folklore, and its suspension as a reference to the island's existence in limbo, sort of surrounded by free nations, yet still attached to the colonial power as a formal part of it. Martinique is part of France, like the equivalent of a state. But for Belz, the importance of the venue rested on its forcing the viewer to confront the vastness of the architectural space and the reality of the elements that composed it, the grooved wheels oozing grease, the geometry of the modern metallic framework. He has called attention when he speaks about the piece to what he describes as the quasi-artisanal nature of the process of installation. Let me quote what he said: "The patient work of collection and assemblage, the repetitive gestures that allowed me to line up the cane leaves, the delicate piling up of the bagasse, all conferred on the installation the airy and fragile appearance of a weaving loom." So, I mean, as I said, he speaks very beautifully about his own work. Buzz is not alone in seeking to equate the intense labor involved in the preparation of his installation to the labor of workers in the cane field. I wanted to give you another example of this through the work of Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, whom you see here working on installing an exhibit called Sugar Bittersweet, a kind of site-specific installation that had been commissioned by the Smith College Museum of Art in November of 2010. Campos Pons, who lives in Boston, was born in 1959 in the Matanzas province of Cuba. And she has spoken frequently about her personal connection to Cuba's history of sugar production, with which her family's history is intermingled. She grew up near one of the now defunct sugar factories in the town of La Vega and lived in the former slave barracks of a plantation of the kind featured both in Eduardo Laplante's prints and Atelier Morales' photographs, sharing with the latter a deeply felt and historically complex relationship to sugar. Matanzas, as many of you might know, was a center of Cuban sugar production from the late 18th to the 20th century, as well as one at one time a port of entry for African slaves. Her own great-grandmother was brought from Nigeria to Cuba as a slave, while her great-grandmother, a Chinese woman said to be from Canton, came to Cuba as an indentured servant to work in the sugar fields. She has said this, I'm quoting from her: "Sugar is the reason the town was built as a plantation. Sugar is what my ancestors worked in. Sugar was the main product of La Vega. Sugar is Cuba." Like Buzz, Campos Pon's preoccupation of place and territory has led her to recreate the space of the plantation in installations that seek to immerse the museum goer in the visual and olfactory experience of being amidst the debris of the sugar field. Campos Pons does not work with bagasse. The material is not readily available in the United States Northeast region, where she works and teaches, but seeks instead to recreate the olfactory qualities so striking in Buzz's work through the inclusion of fermenting sugary concoctions. You can see her here, in those round brownish things are sugary cakes that will then ferment and bring to the installation a particular smell. So given her interest in the recreation of the plantation, space in the museum space, sugar bittersweet is conceived as a sugar cane field represented by, as you see here, a gridded layout of wooden carved stools, each containing a spear positioned upright from the stools, which references slaves who worked in the sugar fields. Its initial impact was described in a review for the Boston Globe as weirdly thrilling. The spears pierced columns of actual raw sugar disc and cast glass forms, becoming visual metaphors for the tall, graceful stalks of the sugar cane plant. And then you'll see, you perhaps can see it from on your screen, that she has these roped together Chinese weights, which allude to the weighing of the crop after harvest and to the Chinese indentured servants that included her grandmother. It's a very complex installation, which is accompanied by a video that you can see in the far back, with interviews with Afro-Cuban subjects, and is intended to show how Cuba's deep involvement in the production of a major commodity, as was sugar, impacted millions of Creoles, Africans, and Chinese. As a result, the work, rather than envisioning sugar as a crystallized and easily melted confection, conjures through the use of squares and discs of white and brown sugar respectively, not sugar's syrupiness, to which the exhibit constantly alludes, but to the less appealing human and environmental exploitation that accompanies it. The installation included, as I said, actually sugary cakes, and the smell was described by a reviewer as contagious and pervasive. This olfactory element, also true of Buzz's bagasse field island silhouettes, is one of the most salient features also of Tania Bruguera's work on sugar production for the 2000 Havana Biennial, which was reinstalled at MoMA in 2017. The work was installed in a tunnel at La Fortaleza, a small colonial Havana fortress that was formerly used as a penitentiary cell. And visitors entered the exhibit, like here. You see this as if you're coming in, right? You entered this kind of guarded cave-like space whose floor was covered by a thick bed of bagasse that kept fermenting in the heat at an increasing pace as the exhibit unfolded, and which made walking through the exhibit somewhat hazardous. That was also kind of put you on an edge. You didn't know where to step, and as you went further, it was darker and darker. The first impression, as a result, was of a powerful and pervasive odor of fermentation. So disoriented by the darkness, the smell, and the effort required for walking over the bagasse, the viewer was drawn towards a blue light emanating from the distance that turned out to be a television screen silently projected looped video images of Fidel Castro giving some of his, very lengthy speeches. A number of naked men were to be met during the trajectory. They made a series of repetitive gestures. One bowed rhythmically, another rubbed himself as if trying frantically to remove a stain. Set us against sterile white floor and walls, the work conjured the barrenness to the soil to which such labor led, right, of the soil. The sterility marked the physical transformation of the land created by the plantation landscape. So where birds used bagasse, debris, to conjure the ecological devastation the sugar plantation left in its wake, Campos Pons and here Tania Bruguera, sort of look at emptiness to speak for the lives and landscapes sacrificed to the advance of sugar production throughout the region. This is an element underscored both through the reference to forced migration throughout all these installations and through the videos that they all share, which capture the narratives of subjects whose lives were significantly impacted by cane, particularly those of Campos Pons' own family. I want to turn to very quickly to another project before I run out of time.
That's perfect, Lisa. I was just going to say that that winding down soon would be great, but it's riveting. So please do finish.
I am winding down.
That's perfect.
In 2009, the same year, Buzz opened his most recent iteration of Machinique. The one where you saw the bright yellow island with the menacing machines over it was the year that Charles Campbell opened this exhibit that he calls Bagasse. And he shares with Bez's commitment to creating spaces for reflection by immersing the viewer in the materiality of the historical and ecological realities of Caribbean islands. He is now the director of the National Museum in Jamaica. So I wanted to take a very quick look at this one because what we have in this installation is, as you see here, the backdrop is a large-scale black and white painting that reproduces the visual disorder of milled cane and speaks to the island's economic lifeblood that was once tended by slaves. The thing is that this immense painting, it looks like bagasse, but when you look very closely, what you will see is that Campbell has embedded in the frenzied and telling lines of the bagasse, sort of hidden in the debris of history and environmental devastation of the plantation, repeated images of the Dutch slave ships that brought their human cargo to the Caribbean. It's a stark palette of black and white, but the artist suggests through these images embedded throughout the chaos and destruction of the plantation, sort of forcing us to witness the traces of suffering that remain, sort of stark reminders of the legacy of slavery. So here, as in the work of other writers, and I'll show you. He has also created these objects that are placed around the exhibit space that all in tiny little detail record moments of history of the slave trade, the Atlantic crossings, the deaths of so many African slaves drowned in the Atlantic. So what I found really interested about Campbell's work, when seen together with the other artists that I've mentioned here, is that their work seems to encapsulate the concerns of this subset of Caribbean artists whose ephemeral installations using bagasse or referring to bagasse, often so dependent on their evanescent materials, underscore a shared preoccupation with the ways in which Caribbean nations, peoples, and environments have been marked by the crushing and discarding of cane turning to molasses, bagasse, ruined environments, and impoverished and exploited lives. So from Atelier Morales' sugar mill ruins, through Buss and Campbell's insistence on the power of bagasse to capture the exploitation inherent to the plantation, to Campos Ponce's incorporation of the sweet smell of decay in her symbol-laden reconstruction of a sugar field. All these works to me demonstrate that the landscape of the plantation has become a canvas for the reconstitution of the violent history of the Caribbean environment. And I love particularly their focus on the people now lost who inhabited them. So thank you so much.
Lisa, thank you for just incredibly fascinating talk, and for me, a brand new terminology and concept. I have a feeling it is for others this evening as well. Bagasse was a very powerful metaphor and concept for thinking about the collateral damage, human and environmental, to many of the economic and political processes that that have so driven the history of Latin America, the Caribbean, and other colonized parts of the world. So that is giving much food for thought, and there are already some great questions coming up in the question box. I want to encourage people to continue to type those in, and we will take those as a group when we turn to question and answer at the end. But before we do that, I would love to turn the presentation over next to Denise Cremin for some teaching concepts and ideas in the same broad topic of teaching about the environment. So, Denise, are you ready? Can we hear you? Yep.
I am, Susan. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Lisa. That was amazing and really, really fascinating. Yes, it's a new term to me too, the bagasse. I think that's just an incredible story and an incredible history. And thank you for making it available to all of us. I love some of your expressions of the environmental art, environmental humanities, and just showing us many, many of the images that you have. So thank you very much for doing that. My presentation for you all is more of a pedagogical, hands-on, what to do in your classroom with environmental issues and teaching. And so I think, do I have control of the
you should
screen?
So click on the screen and then try your advanced button and see if we get a new slide. Let's see. Sometimes it just takes a moment. Let's see.
So I clicked on the screen.
On the screen with your cursor, and then
and there's one. Oh, here we go. Okay. So teaching sustainability through a Spanish language and culture lens, and what I have learned through primary source. And thanks, Susan, for the introduction at the beginning. That was very kind and generous of you. I have learned through primary source. I was introduced to the UN's global goals. You can see on the bottom is the website where you can find the information on what are the global goals for sustainable development presented by the UN, and it's a set of ideas for improving conditions in all countries by 2030. So the UN would like to help in eradicating poverty, zero hunger, innovation infrastructure, so that countries can improve for all, and they can have conditions that are conducive to health and education and equality. So when you go to the Global Goals website, what you can find are these same icons in many different languages. This happens to be Japanese and Italian. I have French, and then also Spanish is my subject area, so I use these ones a lot in my courses, my 10th grade and my 12th grade right now currently. We are studying these in both of those levels. But what they also have on the website for the Global Goals for Sustainable Development for the UN is many, many, many different languages. So if you are an ELL teacher, or in your school you have Arabic or Portuguese, then you can also access these materials in those languages as well, or in English. And they also have many, what you see here, just many different resources that you can use, lesson plans, packets. There are cartoons for younger grades, and ideas for activities for spreading the benefits of all of us implementing these global goals throughout the world. So just a little introduction there. So in terms of the environment and teaching it in your classroom and using a social justice lens and the global goals we have here, this is a lovely little creature named the ajolote. I don't know if you know of this little fellow. He is found only in Xochimilco in Mexico City, and that is the one place where he's located, but he is definitely in danger because of extinction, climate change, pollution, and many other factors. He may go extinct at some point, and many scientists are doing lots of studies on this animal. He's an amphibian and lives mostly in the water, but can live outside of water as well. You see the gills that are sticking out on the side of his head. They can regenerate limbs, tails, arms, legs. And so there was just an article that came out in the New York Times the other day in both English and Spanish on they are investigating the genome of the ajolote and looking at regeneration and how his cells regenerate. And so it's very interesting. Now, when I teach the ajolote, I use the lens of the global goals and oh, sorry, that's a Pokemon symbol. The kids really like it when you can bring in pop culture into your teaching and your environmental stuff. That's Whooper, and Whooper is definitely an ajolote, as you can see. But from the lens of the global goals, what global goals would I use to talk about the ajolote? I would talk about no poverty, because if you can eliminate poverty, then what's happening in Xochimilco is that they're building shanties and shacks all along the river and the tributaries, and they have no plumbing, they have no water, but people have no place to live, and so they are just building these makeshift houses, and that's contributing to the pollution of the waterways and the diminished population of ajolotes in the tributaries. Also, you could use the global goal number 13 of climate action, because the water's getting warmer, and so the water's getting warmer, and that means that is also threatening the population of ajolotes in Xochimilco. Sustainable cities and communities, again, is another global goal that you could use in order to teach the ajolote, because if you were building places for people to live, then they would not need to live on the edges of the tributaries, and that would contribute to preservation. I also have light on land and light over water, which makes a lot of sense.
Denise,
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry to break in. We're actually having trouble hearing you right now. It was perfect before, but there's a lot of static on the line. So Stephanie's going to. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're going to take just a quick minute here. We're a little swap out will help. Oh, well, definitely unplugging that was better. Let's see.
Is that better?
Oh, it is better.
Oh, great.
Oh, I'm sorry, your beloved headphones were the problem. Okay.
Okay, is that
Please
better?
Continue. It's perfect now.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Thanks
you
for correcting that.
To the rescue. Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. you. So anyway, as you can see, global goals, no poverty, climate action, sustainable cities and communities, life on land and life on water would all be associated with preservation of the ajolote. So when you're talking about these environmental issues, much like what Lisa is saying, you're talking about social issues, you're talking about political issues, and creative issues as well when you're talking about the environment and how we see it. Also, so here's another slide of a lesson that I do in my honors sophomore Spanish class, and this is actually geothermal energy in Iceland. What I love about using this lab lesson is that the video that I use is in Spanish, but it's talking about Iceland, and the woman that you see down in the bottom corner down here, she is a Kenyan geophysicist. The UN has a program where they send scientists from developing countries to other countries to learn and bring those techniques back to their own countries. So she's been sent to Iceland to learn about geothermal energy, to bring that back to Kenya. And so what I really love about this, if you're looking at that global goals, the idea of the global goals and the 17 different global goals, there are so many that you could use in talking about this idea of geothermal energy. You can use responsible consumption and production in terms of the environment. You can use affordable and clean energy, renewable energy. But those are the most obvious ones. What you can also do when you are thinking about using topics within this lens of the global goals is I would use gender equality here. So you are looking at a female geophysicist coming from Kenya. I would talk about reduced inequalities, that you are looking at a European nation is really trying to level the playing field by providing information and technology to an African nation, so reduced inequalities, and also decent work and economic growth is another global goal that you could use when talking about this environmental idea. I know a lot of chat nowadays about the developing business of affordable and clean energy, how that is creating more jobs for people in an area that's also beneficial for climate change. I didn't include that on the slide, but you could also include climate change. So there's the global goals are in a circle because they're all interconnected, and it's hard to separate out one from another. This is a project in Cateura in Paraguay. It is called Landfill Harmonic, and Cateura is a suburb of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, and it is also a dump. So all of Asunción's trash comes to Cateura and is dumped right outside of the town limits. And what this program has done is it has gone and sifts through all the trash and makes classical instruments and teaches the young people of Cateura how to play cellos, violins, clarinets, all kinds of classical instruments. They have actually traveled all over the world with their orchestra and played concerts all over the world. And you can see some of the global goals there that I would use in conjunction with a lesson about creating instruments out of trash and trying to have responsible consumption and production and preserve the environment, but also benefit communities. So just here is a good example of how these global goals are one for all and all for one. You can see no goal is more important than another. For example, access to energy will allow a child to study at night, and this is taken directly from the UN Global Goals website. This energy might come from a solar source, so this is also tackling climate change. And then the solar panel industry might be helping a developing country grow their economy. So if you take a look at how these symbols are all interconnected, my students always ask, well, why are they numbered? I say, well, they're numbered just to keep track, but it doesn't mean that any one is more important than the other. They're all interconnected. I'm currently doing projects with both my sophomores and my seniors on the interconnectedness of these global goals, and we're kind of making a jigsaw as they each take a separate global goal for Costa Rica and Venezuela and present on those. But in the meantime, we're seeing, oh, well, if you want to solve good health and well-being in Venezuela, you also have to provide clean water, and you have to have zero hunger and eradicate poverty. So they are all interrelated. These are just some comments that I thought it was interesting for you as educators to see that from my students who, after studying these global goals, I asked them, what does it mean to be a global citizen? And some of their responses are in Spanish, but many of them are English. And I just thought that they were quite telling. So these are 15-year-olds who are starting to think about ideas about the environment and about the world we live in and about being a global citizen, just in a very different way. So if you look at the third one, in my opinion, being a global citizen means understanding and gaining position on the issues in our world today, climate change, politics. It's in our hands, so we must learn and attempt to understand it. Down here, to be a global citizen is to have all of the world goals in mind while living your life and living according to them. Make sure you recycle, do what's best for the planet now so that we have a planet in the future. To be a global citizen, the third one down on this page, it is vital to care about and understand all cultures. American culture is different from those that we learn of, and it's important to understand that people live in poverty and that people are a lot less fortunate than the sophomore class at Newton North High School. And in some of these, you'll see my students have even said, I went and donated money because of what I learned about the global goals and about the needs of people in other places and doing other things. So that is what I wanted to talk about with the global goals in particular. These are just some more of their responses, and thanks for listening. And I hope that you are able to use the global goals in your classroom, because I'm a firm believer. I really believe in what they stand for, and I think that they're very good for teaching. So thanks so much.
Oh, Denise, that's wonderful. Thank you. Those student comments are so inspiring and moving, and I think they, more than anything, show how successful your teaching has been in generating engagement and deep reflection and helping to make the kinds of helping nurture the kinds of young people and global citizens that we would like to see coming out of our schools. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm also thinking what an interesting point of connection on the theme of refuse and what we throw away and recycling. Mm-hmm. Isn't that great to think about the trash instruments as being, an example of the ingenuity of artists to make something beautiful or something thought-provoking from items that are thrown away in a trash heap and in a marginalized community, and what Lisa told us about bagasse. So that was a very interesting point of connection too. So thank you both so much. We have a number of questions that have come up, and so I think I'm going to start putting those out to both of you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about them. So Lisa, a couple of things have come up in the question box, and let me also tell people that I was wrong, and I think what you use is actually the line that says the box that says questions. So please go ahead and if you've been constrained by looking for a chat box, you can use the question box and type in your questions if you have them. But let's see, to start with, Brian Winston wanted to thank you, Elizabeth, for the interesting variety of images you shared, which are quite wonderful and impressive. And Matthew Lind, who's with us tonight, has asked, he said he was curious to know more about a bit more about indentured servants. That was, I think, somewhat new information, and where they were from, in addition to China. Knowing a little bit more about that would be of great interest, Lisa.
Oh, perfect. First of all, Denise, that was wonderful. I jotted down a lot of ideas to use in my classes. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Great. But yeah, the history of indentured servitude in the Caribbean is quite interesting because it began with the abolition of slavery in the Anglophone Caribbean, in the British Empire, in the mid-1830s. And as replacement for indentured slaves, they brought a lot of Indians. This is why Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, and other former British colonies have very substantial populations of migrants from India. They came as indentured servants throughout the 19th century, to the point that many islands in the Caribbean celebrate yearly an Indian Arrival Day, which marks the day that they have designated to celebrate the arrival of the first groups of indentured Indians who came first as single men planning to work and return home, and then entire families. In the rest of the Caribbean, we had a lot of Chinese indentured servants that started coming later in the 19th century, as the islands of the French Caribbean and the Spanish Caribbean began to abolish slavery. First in the French Caribbean in 1848. They participated more in the Indian the receiving Indian indentured servants, but later throughout the Spanish Caribbean, it was mostly Chinese. And and in Latin America also, this is one of the substantial populations of Chinese workers throughout, Peru, Mexico, and other nations in the Caribbean. They each came with their own cultures and religious beliefs, and impacted what we now think of as Creole religions in the Caribbean. Cuban Santeria is heavily imbued with Chinese beliefs. The Obeah practices and other religious practices of the Anglophone Caribbean have a lot of elements that come from Asian, Indian religions, from Hinduism to Islam.
It's a fascinating history. Thank you. That was a great answer. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, no, that was terrific. Thank you, and so much more to explore there. We have just a few more minutes, so let me share one for Denise next. Denise, Teresa Bienami said, thank you for introducing her to the Global Goals this evening. She wondered if you have any thoughts about or have seen successful integration of the Global Goals into elementary lessons. Do you think it's equally promising, and is that an area that you know a little bit about?
I think that the Global Goals actually would be a great place in the primary grades. They have on the UN website, they actually have lots of comic book characters. They have lots of activities for children as well. If you go to the UN's Global Goal website, they do have many coloring pages, all kinds of activities. I know that my own daughter is in 6th grade, and she was super excited. She knows I teach the Global Goals and was very excited to come home and say, Mommy, we're learning about the Global global goals. In 6th grade, we're going to be doing a project, and I chose gender equality. I said, "Yay, honey, that was awesome!" And so I know that that other schools are using them in the elementary grades. I think a great way to, even if you teach kindergarten, just print out the icons and just have them color in the icons and just start recognizing the icons. I think it's just a great way to have them start learning. But the website, the UN website, actually has many activities for elementary grades.
Marvelous. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for your great question and comment, Teresa. Lisa, we only have a couple more minutes, but I wonder if you could give a short answer to what is actually a much bigger question. But a participant tonight, Gabriel Valerio. Gabriel wanted to know a bit more about environmental issues and threats. He was interested in Haiti specifically. If I can tag on to your question, Gabriel, and ask if you can just say in just a few words what the state of the environmental movement or movements is in the Caribbean, and if there are areas of particular strengths and keywords we should be looking up or organizations we should be learning more about. I can, of course, get more resources and we can send them out to the group after if you have other specific thoughts. But just a general picture of environmentalism. And I wonder if the artists that you spoke about see themselves as part of that movement or coalition, or whether they're kind of on separate tracks with those who are doing more concrete advocacy and environmental climate action.
These writers are definitely see themselves as part of a movement, an environmental movement. They see themselves as environmentalists and are very concerned about the state of the land. Haiti is a very interesting case. I think in writing something some years back, I called Haiti the canary in the coal mine of the Caribbean Anthropocene, because what is happening with Haiti is that Haiti was so devastated by sugar cultivation. The impact of sugar cultivation and land mismanagement has led to it retaining about only 2% forest coverage. So it is in the process of a mass extinction of animals, and it's going through galloping desertification. The land has becoming desert-like because of the absence of trees has stopped the rains from coming. So rain doesn't rain periodically, and when those systems come across the region and bring a lot of rain to Haiti, this is when you have those devastating mudslides that both kill entire villages, but also bring the topsoil down, preventing the land from being productive. So the Haiti is a particular island that we look to in order to avoid what has been happening there. We're all very sympathetic to the Haitian claim to being environmental migrants, environmental refugees, because with only 2% forest coverage is not really a viable nation environmentally. So it depends on a lot of food and water coming from the outside. Given that, it's such a complex a situation, I'd be happy to send you some materials to share. Haiti is, the island that is always closest to my heart because of its level of deforestation. Throughout the Caribbean, there are a large number of both local and international organizations working on matters of the environment, from coral reefs to the protection of forests, through bird conservation, endemic species conservation, and mangrove reforestation and the like. But there is a lot of effort being spent on the Caribbean with people with some wonderful ideas, and particularly artists with great projects to engage and educate the community.
I think that I'm seeing that we need to bring you back next semester to do another webinar. We've only begun. From both of you, we've only begun to scratch the surface of your vast knowledge and expertise and experience. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your active and engaged participation this evening. To our two wonderful presenters, Denise Cremin and Lisa Paravisini. What an exciting, sobering but exciting and rich evening you've given us, and so much to think about, to bring back to our students and our teaching. And on behalf of Primary Source, I'm so sorry to cut it off, but I think everybody needs to get ready for bed. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you would like to stay in touch with Primary Source, here are some of the many ways that you can do that. And we hope you'll all be back to join us for the two fabulous seminars, online seminars that will follow later this spring. We'll follow up with all of you and answer some of your questions individually as well through email. So thanks all, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.